There is a version of me that built cases against criminals for 7 years. There is a version of me that became one. There is a version of me that pointed a finger at a 25-year-old kid from Lagos who had done absolutely nothing wrong and watched him lose everything. His job, his freedom, nearly his right to stay in the country he'd chosen as home. And there is a version of me that moved to a small town in Oregon, opened a coffee roastery, married a woman who plays jazz in every room of the house, and convinced himself that silence was the same thing as change. On a Tuesday in October, all 4 versions walked into the same bank. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My name is Tom Beckett. And the day my past came back to collect what I owed it, it didn't arrive with sirens or federal agents or anything you'd see in a movie. It arrived as a phone call from a 23-year-old bank teller named Wesley, who had an unfortunate habit of breathing directly into the receiver and a voice that suggested he had rehearsed what he was about to say at least 4 times, and was still not confident it was going to. Lane, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you where I was when that call came in. Because the distance between where I was and where I ended up matters. The distance is the whole point. I lived in Bend, Oregon. If you haven't been to Bend, it's the kind of town that looks like someone designed it specifically for people who want to disappear into something wholesome. Mountains in every direction. Pine trees that smell like they're trying to sell you a candle. A downtown where the baristas know your dog's name before they know yours, which tells you everything about the local value system. I owned a coffee roastery. Small operation. 1,200 square feet on a side street off Galveston Avenue. The kind of place that attracted people who had opinions about pour-over temperatures and single-origin beans from Ethiopia. I roasted. I brewed. I made small talk with regulars about weather and trail conditions and whether the Deschutes River was running high this season. I was aggressively, deliberately, almost performatively ordinary. This was by design. My wife Meg was a wedding photographer. She had the specific gift of making every person she spoke to feel like the most interesting human being in any room, which is an extraordinary talent when you think about it, because most of the people she spoke to were not, statistically, the most interesting human being in any room. She played jazz in every room of our house from the moment she woke up until the moment she went to sleep. Miles Davis in the kitchen, Coltrane in the living room, something I couldn't identify but had learned not to question in the bathroom. The house was never quiet. I had come to understand that this was not a preference, but a philosophy. Meg believed silence was a thing that needed filling, which was its own kind of irony given that I had built my entire new life on the premise that some silences should never be broken. We had a border collie named Huck, 12 years old, gray around the muzzle, with the dignified energy of a retired professor and the specific, unwavering hostility toward UPS drivers that suggested a deep personal grudge rooted in events none of us were privy to. Huck had opinions. About his food, about the neighbor's cat, about the particular pitch of the doorbell, which he considered a personal attack. He was, by a significant margin, the most honest member of our household. He never pretended to be anything other than exactly what he was, which is more than I could say for myself. I had a scar on my left wrist. Small, about 1.5 inches, from falling off my grandmother's porch when I was 7 years old. I mention this because it becomes important later, in a way that I did not anticipate, and that still makes my chest do something I can't fully describe when I think about it. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She becomes important later too. Everything becomes important later. That's how stories like this work. The details that seem small are the ones carrying all the weight. I also had a habit of standing with my weight shifted slightly to the right, a compensation pattern from a torn meniscus in my left knee that I'd gotten playing basketball in college and never properly rehabbed because I was 21, and 21-year-olds believe they are immortal, which is adorable in retrospect and inconvenient in practice. I mention this because someone noticed. Someone cataloged it. Someone filed it away with the scar and the bourbon preference and the way I hold a coffee cup and used all of it to become me, which is a sentence I never expected to write and hope to never write again. But that was later. That was the Tuesday. Before the Tuesday, I was fine. I want to be clear about that. I had my roastery. I had my wife. I had my dog. I had a savings account that Meg had been building for 16 years with the disciplined ferocity of a woman who understood that financial security was not a suggestion, but a personal mandate. She kept a spreadsheet, color-coded, updated every single month, green for on track, yellow for caution, red for what she called unacceptable deviation from the plan, which I had always found both impressive and mildly terrifying. $275,000. 16 years of Meg's careful, relentless, almost architectural saving. I thought I was safe. I thought I had buried the other versions of myself deep enough that they would stay buried. I thought silence and distance and a small town in Oregon would be enough to keep the past in the past, which is the kind of thing a person believes right up until the moment a bank teller calls them on a Tuesday morning and says something that rearranges the entire architecture of their life. My phone rang. Unknown number. Bend area code. It was a Tuesday. I answered the way I always answer unknown numbers, which is with the specific calibrated cheerfulness of a man who is giving away absolutely nothing. Friendly. Open. Completely hollow. The voice equivalent of a locked door painted to look welcoming. This is Tom Beckett. A breath on the other end. Slightly too close to the receiver. The particular breathing pattern of a person who has not yet learned that phone microphones are more sensitive than they think. Mr. Beckett, this is Wesley calling from Summit Credit Union on Franklin Avenue. I'm sorry to bother you, sir. But, and in that but was everything. The entire rest of this story lived in the half-second pause after that word. Because what followed the but was the specific hesitation of a young man who had rehearsed a sentence, probably in the break room, probably while staring at his reflection in the microwave door, and was now standing at the edge of actually saying it, and realizing that rehearsal and execution are two fundamentally different experiences. I don't quite know how to say this, he said. Try the beginning, I said. Works most of the time. Sir. There are two of you here right now. I did not respond immediately. Not because I didn't understand. I understood before he finished the sentence. I didn't respond because there are moments in a life where the appropriate response requires a silence that is longer than the one your instincts want to give. This was one of those moments. Wesley continued, his voice dropping into the careful register of a person delivering information they know is going to rearrange someone's day. Your wife is here, sir. At window 5. With a gentleman who presented your driver's license, your account PIN, your social security number. Everything checks out on paper, but I've been here 4 years, Mr. Beckett. And I've watched you come in every other Friday since you moved to Bend. And something is. He paused. Something is off. The way he holds himself. Little things. I can't explain it exactly. But it's not you. 4 years. Wesley had been watching me walk into that credit union for 4 years, and had apparently assembled enough of a mental file on me to flag the copy when it arrived. Tellers, it turns out, are the unsung intelligence operatives of the American banking system. I made a mental note to tip Wesley substantially better going forward, assuming I had a going forward, which at this moment was not entirely certain. Are they still there? I said. My voice was even. Professionally even. The kind of even that used to be my most valuable professional asset, and that a therapist in Seattle had told me 3 years ago was also my most significant personal liability, because apparently being able to flatten your emotional frequency to 0 is useful in crisis situations and devastating in marriages. She had not been wrong about either. Yes, sir. They're at window 5. Your wife is doing most of the talking. That sounded like Meg. Meg always did the talking. In restaurants, in appointments, in any situation that required human interaction with strangers. Not because I couldn't, because Meg operated on the genuine belief that every person she encountered deserved her full warmth and attention, and she delivered it with a sincerity that I had spent 4 years studying, and still could not determine was a skill or a superpower. What are they trying to do, Wesley? A pause. The kind of pause that weighs its words. Wire transfer, sir. Joint account. $275,000. I put down my pen. Not dramatically. Gently. The way you set something down when your hands have decided, independent of the rest of you, that they need to be empty for whatever comes next. $275,000. Every single dollar Meg had saved in 16 years. The spreadsheet. The color-coded cells. The monthly updates that arrived in my inbox with the subject line, Financial Health Check. As though our savings account were a patient requiring regular monitoring. Green for on track. Yellow for caution. Red for unacceptable deviation from the plan. 16 years of discipline and denial, and putting away what could have been spent because Meg believed, with the conviction of a woman raised by parents who had lost everything once and never intended to lose it again, that the money in that account was the difference between safety and freefall. Wesley, I said. Yes, sir. Find a reason to delay them. Tell them the system is running slow. Tell them there's a verification hold on outgoing transfers over 100,000. Tell them you need a supervisor. Tell them literally anything, Wesley. But keep them at that window. A pause. Shorter than I expected. Yes, sir. I can do that. And Wesley, sir. Don't tell them you called me. I hung up. The kitchen was exactly the same as it had been 45 seconds ago. Same light. Through the window. Same jazz coming from the living room. Meg's speakers still running on the timer she set every morning, which meant the house sounded like Meg was home, even when Meg was apparently at a bank with a man wearing my face, trying to transfer our life savings to somewhere I was not yet ready to think about. Huck opened one eye from under my desk. He assessed my energy with the practiced efficiency of a creature who had been reading my moods for 12 years and had developed a fairly accurate internal barometer. Whatever he saw made him close the eye again. He rested his chin on my shoe. Reasonable response. I sat for exactly 30 seconds. Not because I needed to think. I knew what was happening before Wesley finished his second sentence. I knew who was standing at window 5, before my conscious mind was willing to say the name. I sat because 30 seconds was the amount of time I needed to put away the version of myself that had a coffee roastery and a jazz-filled house and a color-coded savings spreadsheet and locate the other one. The one I had spent 4 years burying under pour-over ratios and small talk about river levels and the deliberate, effortful construction of an ordinary life in a small town where nobody asked questions because nobody had any reason to. He was still there. The other version. He had been waiting with the patient confidence of someone who always knew he would be needed again. I found him. Immediately. Of course I did. You don't lose a thing like that. You just learn to keep it in a room you don't visit. But the room is always there. The door is always unlocked. And when the phone rings on a Tuesday morning and a bank teller tells you there are 2 of you, the door opens before you even reach for the handle. Summit Credit Union on Franklin Avenue was 9 minutes from my house under normal driving conditions. I made it in 6. Not because I was speeding. Exactly. More that the version of me now driving had a different relationship with traffic laws than the version who had been filling out tax reports 20 minutes ago. He didn't break them. He simply treated them as suggestions made by people who weren't currently in his situation. I parked across the street rather than in the credit union lot. Old habit. The kind of habit that doesn't come from a manual or a training seminar, but from years of entering situations where knowing your exit before you know your entrance is the difference between walking out and being carried out. I hadn't parked like this in 4 years. My hands remembered before my brain gave permission. From across the street, through the credit union's large front windows, I had a clear line of sight to the interior. Summit Credit Union was not an architecturally ambitious building. It was glass and beige brick and the kind of neutral carpeting that says we are trustworthy and boring, and your money is safe here. The teller windows ran along the back wall, numbered 1 through 6, and at window 5 I could see them. Meg first. Her hair, that specific shade of auburn that caught light differently depending on the season, darker in winter, almost copper in summer, currently somewhere in the October middle ground. Her olive green coat, the one she'd bought 3 weeks ago, at a consignment shop in the old mill district, the one with the brass buttons she'd been unreasonably delighted about because Meg had the capacity to find genuine joy in buttons, which was one of approximately 900 things about her that I had cataloged over 4 years and filed under evidence that this woman is fundamentally better than you. She was talking to Wesley, leaning slightly forward the way she always did when speaking to someone in a service position, not condescending, engaged, actually listening, actually caring, because that was Meg. The warmth wasn't performance. It was architecture. It was how she was built, and next to her, the back of a man's head, my height, my build, my haircut, though his was slightly neater than mine, which I found personally offensive in a way that probably says more about my priorities in a crisis than I'd like to admit. He was standing with his weight shifted slightly to the right. My right shift. The compensation pattern from my torn meniscus. The one I'd had since college. The one that no one would notice unless they'd spent a significant amount of time studying how I stand, which apparently someone had. He was wearing a jacket. Dark blue, almost exactly the shade I wore most frequently, the one Meg had picked out for me at REI 2 years ago because she said it matched my eyes, which I had found flattering at the time and was now finding considerably less so because the fact that he was wearing that color meant Meg had mentioned it. And the fact that Meg had mentioned it meant there had been conversations. And the fact that there had been conversations meant this was not a thing that had started last week or last month. I watched him for 60 seconds through the glass. Still. Controlled. The kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally to most people. The kind you learn. The kind I used to teach. My phone buzzed. Wesley. Texting from what I imagined was somewhere beneath the counter, with the concentrated subtlety of a man who had never been a spy and was discovering in real time that espionage was more stressful than it looked in movies. System delay buys maybe 10 more minutes, sir. He is getting restless. I typed back. That's enough. Thank you, Wesley. I put the phone down and looked back at window 5. The man had shifted position slightly, turning to say something to Meg. And as he did, his left hand came up briefly to adjust his collar, and I saw it. The scar on his left wrist. Small, about 1.5 inches. In exactly the position where mine sat. The scar I'd gotten at 7 years old, falling off my grandmother Ruth's porch while trying to climb the railing because she'd told me not to climb the railing. And I was 7 and 7-year-olds treat prohibitions as invitations. 3 stitches. My grandmother had driven me to the emergency room in her station wagon while singing hymns, which she did whenever she was stressed, and I had sat in the passenger seat bleeding onto a dish towel and thinking that this was simultaneously the worst and most interesting thing that had ever happened to me. He had it. The scar. Not the real one. Obviously. A fabrication. Makeup or prosthetic or whatever method produces a convincing 1.5 inch scar on a wrist for the purpose of becoming someone else. But the placement was exact. The angle was exact. The slight raised texture that I could see even from across a street through a window was exact, which meant Meg had described it to him. In detail. The kind of detail you only know if someone has traced that scar with their finger. Which Meg had done on our second date at a restaurant on Bond Street. Running her fingertip along the raised line and asking me how I got it. And I had told her the porch story, and she had laughed and said she liked a man with evidence of a misspent childhood. She had told him about the scar. She had told him about the jacket color. She had told him about the knee. She had told him the specific, intimate, small details that only accumulate between two people who trust each other with the private geography of a life. Which meant whatever this was, It had not started at a bank window on a Tuesday morning. It had been built, carefully, over time, with the kind of patient architectural precision that I recognized because I had once built things the same way. Different things. Worse things. But with the same hands. I sat in my car across from Summit Credit Union on Franklin Avenue in Bend, Oregon. And I let that settle into its true shape. Slow. Cold. Clarifying. The way things settle when you stop arguing with what they actually are. Then I opened the car door, stepped into the October wind, and walked toward the side entrance. But before I tell you what happened inside that bank, I need to tell you about the man standing at window 5. Because you can't understand what he did to me without understanding what we did together, and you can't understand what we did together without understanding who we were before we became the kind of people who do things that require this much explanation. Let me tell you about Danny Kerr. I met Danny when I was 27 years old. Both of us entry-level investigators at a firm in Seattle called Ashford & Crane. Insurance fraud. That was the business. Companies hired Ashford & Crane when they suspected someone was filing false claims, and Ashford & Crane sent people like Danny and me to find out if the suspicion was warranted, which it almost always was, because people who commit insurance fraud are generally not as clever as they believe themselves to be. And the ones who are clever enough to be difficult are the ones that made the job interesting. Danny was lean, quick, with a face that I once described to a colleague as aggressively forgettable, which sounds like an insult, but was the highest compliment I could give in our line of work. Danny's face did not catch on anything. It slid through rooms the way water slides through a drain, present and then gone, leaving no residue. You could talk to Danny for 20 minutes and walk away with the vague sense that you'd spoken to someone pleasant but be entirely unable to describe him to a sketch artist. This was not a deficiency. This was a weapon. I watched him change once. We were in an elevator on the 14th floor of a building in downtown Seattle, heading to the lobby to meet a client, and Danny was Danny, my partner. Slouchy posture, hands in pockets, the mild, restless energy he carried everywhere, like a low-grade electrical current. The doors opened on the ground floor, and the man who walked out was not the man who had walked in. Different posture. Straighter. Something shifted in his shoulders that redistributed his entire silhouette. His walk had changed. Longer stride. More deliberate. And somewhere between the 14th floor and the lobby, he had acquired what appeared to be a mild southern accent that I would have sworn under oath was authentic. I asked him afterward how he did it. We were sitting in a bar on Capitol Hill, the kind of bar that served whiskey in glasses that were slightly too heavy, which was Seattle's way of telling you the markup was justified. Pick one thing to change, he said. Just one thing. Everything else follows. You change the walk, the voice adjusts. You change the posture, the face rearranges. People don't see a collection of details, Tom. They see a feeling. Change the feeling, and the details take care of themselves. I thought about that for a long time. Longer than was probably healthy, because what Danny was describing was not a party trick. It was a philosophy. The idea that identity is not a fixed structure but a negotiable one. That the distance between who you are and who you could pretend to be is not a wall but a door, and the door is never locked. I found this idea fascinating in the way you find a loaded weapon fascinating, with respect and a clear awareness that fascination is not the same thing as permission. We were partners for 7 years. We investigated claims, built cases, dismantled fraud operations from the inside, with the particular satisfaction of people who understood how the machinery worked, because they were fully capable of building the machinery themselves. We were good. Substantially better than good. We were the team other investigators mentioned when they wanted to feel inadequate about their own clearance rates, which we were not nearly humble enough to discourage. The problem with being very good at understanding how fraud works is that it is a philosophically short walk from understanding it to committing it. You stand at the edge of that line every single day, looking across, and the other side starts to look less like a cliff and more like a step. A small one, barely worth mentioning. Danny took that step in year 5. I took it in year 6. I will not dress it up. We identified a target. A physician in Bellevue running a network of fraudulent injury claims through 4 clinics. The operation was worth millions. Conservatively, we were hired to build the case, and we built it. Thoroughly. Precisely. With the kind of meticulous documentation that makes prosecutors smile in a way that defense attorneys find unpleasant. But in the process of building that case, we found something else. A seam. A place in the financial architecture where money moved through channels that no one was watching closely because everyone assumed someone else was watching. We took $275,000 out of that seam before delivering the rest of the case to the authorities. We told ourselves it was justice adjacent. The physician was a criminal. The money was dirty. We were simply redirecting a portion of dirty money toward people who had earned it. Those people being us. Which is the kind of moral arithmetic that only works if you never write it down and look at it in daylight. It didn't work. The math never works. I knew that then. I know it now. The difference between then and now is that I am no longer willing to pretend otherwise. The physician's operation collapsed. Federal investigators came in. The case was clean, airtight, exactly as we'd built it. But the money was a problem. $275,000 doesn't just evaporate. It leaves a shape. An absence. The kind of absence that a certain type of investigator notices the way a carpenter notices a missing beam. Not because it's visible, but because the structure around it behaves differently than it should. An internal investigator named Howard Marsh was assigned to examine the discrepancy. Howard Marsh was the kind of man who became an investigator not because he enjoyed the work, but because he believed, with a sincerity that bordered on religious conviction, that numbers should add up and that when they didn't, someone somewhere was lying, and that lying was a thing that should be identified and corrected with the same dispassionate thoroughness you'd apply to fixing a leaking pipe. He was humorless. He was meticulous. He was, in the specific way that mattered most, completely incorruptible. Danny panicked. I did not panic, but I did something worse than panic. Something that I have carried every single day since, and will carry for the rest of whatever days I have left. And I will deserve the weight of it for every one of them. I helped Danny build a case. Fabricated. Precise. Devastatingly convincing. A case that redirected Howard Marsh's investigation away from us and toward a junior analyst at Ashford and Crane. A kid who had nothing to do with any of it. His name was Sam Okafor. Sam Okafor was 25 years old. I need you to sit with that number for a moment before I continue. Because 25 is an age that means something specific. It is the age at which a person has been an adult long enough to believe they understand how the world works, but not long enough to understand how wrong that belief is. It is the age of plans, of trajectory, of the breathtaking confidence that comes from having survived the early chaos, of figuring yourself out and arriving, finally, at the beginning of the thing you were building toward. Sam had come to the United States from Lagos, Nigeria, on an academic scholarship when he was 19, engineering initially at the University of Washington, before shifting to risk management because he discovered he had a mind that could look at a system and see not just how it worked, but where it was weak. He graduated with honors. He secured a work visa. He got hired at Ashford and Crane as a junior analyst, entry-level, small desk, smaller salary, and the implicit promise that if you work hard enough and long enough, both will grow. Sam worked hard. He was the first person in the office every morning, and rarely the first to leave. He sent money home to Lagos, every single paycheck. Every one. His mother, his younger sister studying to be a nurse, his younger brother in secondary school who wanted to be an architect, a dream that required money the Okafor family did not have, which is why Sam was in Seattle in the first place. He was the bridge, the pipeline, the mechanism by which a family 6,000 miles away could dare to dream about things like nursing degrees and architecture programs. I knew all of this when I built the case against him. I knew his name, his background, his family. I knew he sent money home. I knew about the sister and the brother. I knew he was the only person at Ashford and Crane, both junior enough to be plausible as a suspect and isolated enough to be unable to mount the kind of defense that would unravel what Danny and I had constructed. I chose him precisely because of those things. Because vulnerability is a targeting criterion when you are the kind of person I was, and I was exactly that kind of person, and no amount of coffee roasting in Oregon will ever change that. The case I built was meticulous. That is the part that still wakes me up. Not that I did it, but how well I did it. Digital footprints placed where Sam's access logs would corroborate them. Transaction timestamps aligned with his work schedule. A pattern of small withdrawals that mimicked exactly the kind of cautious embezzlement a young analyst might attempt if he were supplementing his income. It looked like a man sending money home to Lagos through an unauthorized channel. Howard Marsh followed the trail because it was a good trail. Because I made it good. And at the end of that trail was Sam Okafor, sitting at his small desk, doing his job, entirely unaware that two men he passed in the hallway every day had already decided he would carry what they had done. Sam was arrested on a Wednesday, convicted 4 months later. 12 months in federal prison. His work visa was revoked. He spent 3 additional months in immigration limbo, facing deportation back to Nigeria, which would have meant returning to Lagos not as the son who made it in America, but as the son sent back in handcuffs. A pro bono immigration attorney named Garcia fought the deportation and won on procedural grounds. While Sam was in prison, his family in Lagos went 6 months without the money he had been sending. His brother dropped out of school. His sister deferred her nursing program. His mother managed. That is all I know. She managed, which is a word that contains an enormous amount of suffering inside a very small container. Danny and I walked away clean. Completely clean. No one looked at us. The trail led to Sam and stopped at Sam because I had built it to do exactly that. I lasted 8 more months. 8 months of walking into Ashford and Crane every morning and passing Sam's empty desk, which they didn't reassign for 11 weeks, and for 11 weeks, there was a small desk with nothing on it in my peripheral vision every single day, and every single day I did not look at it directly, and every single day I saw it completely. I quit on a Thursday. Danny met me in the parking garage on my last day, leaning against a concrete pillar with the studied casualness of a man who had been waiting and wanted it to look accidental. "You can't just walk away from what we are, Tom," he said. "It doesn't work like that." I looked at him. At this man, I had spent 7 years beside. This man who had taught me that identity was a door, not a wall. This man who could become anyone between an elevator and a lobby, and who was standing in a parking garage telling me that the one thing he could not do was let me become someone else. I walked away. I drove south. I found Bend, Oregon, a town that does not ask questions because it is full of people who moved there specifically to stop being asked them. I opened a coffee roastery. I learned about pour-over ratios and roast profiles, which is exactly as boring as it sounds, and that was the point. I met Meg on a Tuesday evening at a bar on Bond Street. She was sitting 2 seats down and commented on my bourbon order, with a specificity I found charming. Same brand I'd been ordering since Seattle. Same glass. Neat. I did not think, at the time, to wonder how a woman I had never met could have an opinion about a drink she had never seen me order. Charm disables the analytical mind, which I knew professionally and had apparently learned nothing from personally. We married 7 months later. I never told Meg any of it. Not Ashford and Crane. Not Danny. Not the $275,000. Not Sam Okafor. I told myself I was protecting her. The truth was that I was protecting myself, because telling Meg would have required me to be the man who did those things in front of the woman I loved, and I was not brave enough for that. Sitting in my car outside a bank in Bend on a Tuesday morning, watching a man who used to be my partner stand next to my wife wearing my face and my scar and my jacket, I was beginning to appreciate that Danny Kerr had, as usual, been entirely correct. You cannot walk away from what you are. You can only walk until it catches up. The side entrance to Summit Credit Union was a commercial access door on the east wall of the building. Gray metal, no signage, the kind of door that exists in every commercial building in America and that most people walk past without registering because it radiates the specific energy of not being for you. It was accessible to account holders with a card during business hours. I had used it exactly once before, 14 months ago, to drop off quarterly tax documents after the front entrance had already closed. I used it now for entirely different reasons. The interior of the bank from the side was a different geography than the front. The teller windows, which from the street presented themselves as a clean horizontal line, were from this angle a staggered arrangement that created sightlines and blind spots. I could read the way a chess player reads a board. Window 5 was visible at roughly 45 degrees without being visible from it. I could see Wesley's back, Meg's profile, and the man beside her, without any of them seeing me. I found the branch manager's office at the end of a short hallway carpeted in the same institutional beige as everything else. The door was closed. I knocked once and opened it before anyone answered, which is a thing you do when the situation does not allow for the polite fiction of waiting to be invited. A woman in her 50s looked up from her desk with the expression of someone who had been precisely 1 second away from saying "come in" and was mildly irritated at being preempted. She had close-cropped silver hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the focused, unhurried energy of a person who had been managing things for a very long time and was not easily rattled. Her nameplate said Brenda Holloway, branch manager. "Miss Holloway," I said, with the calm, pleasant authority of a man who belongs exactly where he is. "My name is Tom Beckett. I have a joint account at this branch. There is a man at window 5 currently attempting to impersonate me and wire transfer $275,000 from my joint savings. I need 60 seconds of your time, and I need you to call the police while we talk. Can you do both of those things simultaneously?" Brenda Holloway looked at me. She looked at her computer screen. She typed something with the efficient speed of a woman who had been preparing for a crisis her entire career and was, somewhere beneath the professionalism, slightly pleased to finally have one. She read whatever came up, reached for her desk phone, and dialed without looking at the number. "Sit down, Mr. Beckett," she said. I sat. Through the glass partition that separated her office from the bank floor, I could see window 5 at an angle. The back of Danny's head, Meg's profile, Wesley, who appeared to be explaining something about the transfer system with the concentrated earnestness of a man who was making up technical difficulties in real time and discovering that he was better at improvisation than he had previously suspected. Brenda spoke into the phone with brisk, clipped efficiency, relaying the situation to what I assumed was Bend Police Dispatch. She dispatched a silent alert to Wesley through the bank's internal messaging system. She pulled up my account, confirmed the wire transfer was still pending, still suspended in the processing limbo that Wesley had manufactured with admirable creativity. Then she looked at me across her desk with the calm focus of a professional who needed exactly one more piece of information. "Mr. Beckett," she said. "The woman with this man. Do you know her?" "Yes," I said. A pause. "She is a joint account holder." "Yes." "That complicates the criminal exposure on the wire transfer," she said carefully. "If she's a joint holder, authorizing the transaction." "I understand," I said. "The impersonation element is still actionable." She studied me. "The officers will be here in 5 minutes," she said. "I can give you 2. 2 is enough." She stood, smoothed her jacket, and led me out of her office onto the bank floor. "Let me tell you something about seeing a person impersonate you. It is one of the stranger experiences available to a human being. I had spent years thinking about impersonation from the professional side, the technical mechanics, the methodology, but the technical side does not prepare you for the visceral, slightly surreal experience of walking up behind your own silhouette. I came up beside him slowly. I stood there for exactly 2 seconds before either of them noticed me. 2 seconds in which I was able to observe, from a distance of about 18 inches, just how good Danny Kerr had gotten. The haircut was mine. The posture, that particular right-leaning stance, was mine. He had my cadence when he spoke. The slight Pacific Northwest flatness that 4 years in Bend hadn't changed because some accents are load-bearing structures. They hold up too much to be easily removed. The jacket was almost exactly the shade of blue Meg had picked for me, which meant she had told him, which I had already known from the parking lot, but which hit differently at 18 inches than it had through a windshield. He was mid-sentence, something to Wesley about a transfer reference number, speaking with the unhurried confidence of a man who had no doubt that he was exactly who he claimed to be. And then his peripheral vision caught me and he stopped. Not trailed off. Stopped. One word into the sentence. Like a recording cut, he turned his head. We looked at each other, and Danny Kerr smiled. Not a villain's smile. Not triumphant. Not cruel. Not any of the things you might expect from a man caught in the middle of stealing your life. It was the smile I remembered from 7 years of partnership. Slightly rueful. Genuinely warm. The smile of a man who had missed you and was choosing a spectacularly inconvenient moment to show it. Tom, he said. Danny, I said. Meg turned. And here is what Meg's face did. I am going to be precise about this, because the sequence matters. First, shock. Genuine. Unperformed. The kind that rearranges a face before the person wearing it has any say in the matter. Meg's eyes went wide in a way I had never seen in 4 years of marriage, and I had made a fairly thorough study of Meg's eyes because they were, in my professional and personal opinion, extraordinary, and because studying them had become one of the quiet organizing principles of my daily life. This was not an expression from the catalog. This was new. Then, and this is the part I need you to understand, because it changes everything that follows, something that was almost relief. So brief, it barely registered. A flicker. A shadow of something crossing her face the way a bird crosses a window, there and gone before you can identify the species. But I had spent 4 years learning the specific geography of Meg's expressions, the way a cartographer learns a coastline. Not just the obvious features, but the inlets, the hidden coves, the places where the water does something unexpected. I saw it. Relief. For a fraction of a second, Meg was relieved. Then, fear. Not the simple fear of being caught, which I knew well enough to recognize instantly. Something more layered than that. The fear of a person watching 2 separate worlds make contact for the first time, and understanding that the collision is going to produce wreckage, and that she is standing at the exact center of the impact zone. Tom, she started. Don't, I said. Not harshly. Just not yet. I looked at Danny. Outside, I said. Both of you. Right now. Danny glanced at Wesley. Wesley was staring at a point roughly 6 inches above all of our heads, with the concentrated neutrality of a man who had decided that whatever was happening at window 5 was categorically, definitively, and permanently above his pay grade. His face had achieved a state of professional blankness so complete that it bordered on artistic. I made another mental note about Wesley's tip, which at this point was becoming substantial. Danny straightened, adjusted the jacket. My jacket's color. My jacket's cut. He looked at the transfer paperwork on the counter, then back at me, and I saw him calculate whether it was worth attempting to complete the transaction. The calculation took about half a second. He came out from behind the counter without another word. We stood on the sidewalk outside Summit Credit Union in the October cold. The 3 of us. The specific geometric configuration of people who all know something that none of them have said yet. Wind coming down from the Cascades carrying the smell of pine and the first suggestion of winter. Leaves moving across the pavement. In short, directionless bursts, unable to settle. Meg had her arms crossed. Not defensively. I knew that posture. That was Meg cold. Meg trying to hold herself together through the physical act of self-containment. She was looking at the ground, at the concrete, at a crack in the sidewalk that I suspect she could have described in photographic detail for the rest of her life. Because when you are standing between two versions of a truth you have been managing for years, you look at whatever is directly beneath your feet, because it is the only thing that isn't moving. Danny was looking at me with the expression of a man who has prepared for multiple versions of this conversation and is waiting to see which one we're having. Patient. Calibrated. The face of someone who has run the scenarios and is ready for all of them. I recognized the expression because I had taught him to wear it. In stressful situations, I used to tell him, the person who chooses last has the most information. Danny had always been an excellent student. I looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that the silence became its own kind of communication. Long enough that Meg looked up from the crack in the sidewalk. Sam Okafor, I said. Something moved through Danny's face. Gone in an instant. Controlled. Buried. Redirected with the speed of a man who had trained himself not to react to that name. But I saw it. The same thing I saw in my own mirror for months after I left Seattle. The specific micro-expression of a name you have practiced not flinching at and still flinch at, because some names are heavier than the muscles you've built to carry them. He got out 14 months ago, I said. I know his release date. I know where he is. Columbus, Ohio. He went back to school. Information technology at a community college, which is either ironic or logical depending on your perspective. He has a daughter now. He lost the first 2 years of her life because of what we did. I paused. I know all of that because I checked. Every 6 months. Set a reminder on my phone like a dentist appointment. Pulled up whatever I could find, public records, social media, anything accessible without crossing the line from remorse into surveillance. Because knowing doesn't fix what I did. But not knowing felt worse. Not knowing felt like the final act of looking away, and I had done enough looking away to last several lifetimes. Danny was quiet. His jaw had tightened by a degree that most people would not have noticed. I noticed because I had spent 7 years reading Danny Kerr's face the way he read other people's, and a tightened jaw on Danny was the equivalent of a scream from anyone else. How long have you known about Meg? I said. A pause. The kind of pause that is not hesitation, but selection. Danny choosing which version of the answer to give. Deciding, in the space between my question and his response, how much truth the moment required. 2 years, he said. 2 years. I absorbed that the way you absorb a number that restructures everything you thought you knew about the shape of your own life. Meg and I had been married for 4 years, which meant that somewhere in the first year of my carefully constructed ordinary life in Bend, the roastery and the jazz and the border collie and the saving spreadsheet, Danny Kerr had found me. Assessed my situation, identified the precise mechanism that would cause the most damage, and then waited an entire year before deploying it. That was the Danny I knew. Patient, architectural, never rushing toward a destination when the approach could be made to serve the outcome. Danny didn't just execute plans. He cultivated them. He let them grow roots before he pulled. How? I said, not accusatory, genuinely curious. The way I had always been genuinely curious about skilled work, even when the skilled work was being performed on me. Danny almost smiled. The ghost of something that in a different context, in a different decade, would have been the expression of a partner sharing a professional insight over whiskey. You always order the same bourbon, he said. Same brand, same glass. Neat. In Seattle, in Bend. You walked into a bar 3 weeks after you moved to town, ordered your drink, and the bartender remembered you the next time because you tipped well and you were the only person in Bend, Oregon ordering that specific label. He paused. It took me about a month from there. A month. 4 weeks to find the thread. And then he had simply followed it until it led him everywhere he needed to go. I thought about the bar on Bond Street. Tuesday evening. Meg, 2 seats down, commenting on my bourbon with a specificity I had found charming. The specificity of a woman who had been briefed. who had been given a script, who had walked into that bar knowing exactly what I would be drinking because someone had told her, and who had turned that knowledge into a meet-cute so natural that I had never once in 4 years questioned it. "She approached you," I said to Danny. Not a question. Danny said nothing, which was its own answer. I turned to Meg. She was looking at me now, her arms still crossed, her face doing something I had no prior reference for in 4 years of careful study. And the reason I had no reference for it was that this was the expression she had been keeping from me, the one that lived underneath all the other expressions, the foundation that the jazz and the warmth and the Sunday morning coffee and the buttons on the consignment shop coat had all been built on top of, carefully, deliberately, the way you build a house over a fault line and hope the ground doesn't move. "He contacted me first," she said. Her voice was steady, quiet. "2 years ago. Told me who you were, what you'd done." She took a breath that was controlled in the way that breathing is controlled when the alternative is not controlled at all. "What you did to Sam Okafor." I stood with that. "And?" I said. I didn't believe him. She looked at me directly. So I checked. "How much did you find?" "Enough," she said. The word enough landed with the weight of a word that has been chosen carefully over a very long period of time. Not everything. Not all of it. Enough. Which meant she had found what she needed to find, and had stopped looking before she found what she couldn't live with. Which was its own kind of answer. A boundary drawn not by the limits of what was available, but by the limits of what she could carry, and still stay in the house, and still play jazz in every room, and still kiss me in the morning, and still update the spreadsheet every month. In green, yellow, and red. "Why didn't you leave?" I said. She was quiet for a moment. The wind came down off the Cascades and moved her hair, and she didn't fix it. "Because I wanted to understand it first," she said. "Who you were before. Whether the man I married was real. Or," she stopped. The sentence had a destination she wasn't ready to arrive at. Not here. Not on a sidewalk. Not with Danny standing 3 feet away wearing my face. Danny spoke. "The money would go to Sam," he said. His voice had shifted into something I recognized. The pitch of a person making a case. Selling a version. "It's restitution, Tom. You stole exactly $275,000 from that operation. I have the records. Sending it to Sam is the only way to." I said her name. Meg. I said it quietly. Precisely. Not with anger. With the full weight of needing her to stop and hear me. The full weight of needing what I was about to say. To land in a place where it would stay. "Meg, the money was never going to Sam Okafor." She looked at Danny. Danny looked at the sidewalk. And there it was. The particular silence of a woman realizing she has been the most important instrument in someone else's plan, and was the last person in the room to know it. The silence of understanding, fully and finally, that the story she had been told about justice and restitution and making things right was itself a con, built with the same patient architectural precision as everything else Danny Kerr had ever built, and that she had been not the partner but the material. I watched it move through her face. The realization. Not shock this time. Something slower. Colder. The kind of understanding that doesn't arrive all at once but assembles itself piece by piece, like a photograph developing in a dark room, the image becoming clearer and more terrible with every second of exposure. She looked at me, then back at Danny, then at the ground again. And I understood that Meg was doing something I recognized, because I had done it myself in a parking garage in Seattle 4 years ago. She was recalculating. Every conversation, every detail, every moment she had believed was real, running it back through a new filter and watching it change shape. The wind blew. The leaves scattered. And somewhere inside Summit Credit Union, Wesley was presumably still staring at a point 6 inches above the world, waiting for permission to come back down. The account it was wiring to. I said to Danny, "Where does it actually go?" "Nothing." Danny's eyes held mine. Steady, professional, the performance still running even now. Even standing on a sidewalk with the architecture collapsing around him. Because for Danny, the performance was not a choice, but a reflex. A survival mechanism so deeply embedded that it operated independent of circumstances, the way a heart beats independent of the person it belongs to. Costa Rica, I said. Or Belize. Or Panama. Danny, I built the same financial structures you did. I know the routing. I know what offshore architecture looks like because I helped design it. Where does it go? Costa Rica, he said quietly. Meg made a sound. Small. Not a word. Not quite a breath. Something between the two that contained more information than either. Danny's face was changing. Not dramatically. Not the way faces change in movies, where the mask falls away in one theatrical gesture. This was slower, subtler, the performance draining out of him the way color drains from a photograph left in sunlight, feature by feature, muscle by muscle. And what was underneath, what had been underneath the entire time, was not the composed, calculating operator I had been facing for the last 20 minutes. It was something messier, more human, tired, cornered. A version of Danny Kerr I had not seen since a parking garage in Seattle 4 years ago. The version that existed underneath the man who could become anyone. The version that was, when you stripped everything else away, simply afraid. I needed the money, Tom, he said. And his voice, for the first time, had lost the performance. What was underneath was raw, worn, the voice of a man who had been running for 4 years and had just realized the road was ending. There's a woman, he said. Gloria Reeves. Former insurance fraud investigator. Retired. But she didn't stop. She's been building something privately for 2 years. On her own time. Her own money. Her retirement savings, Tom. She's spending her retirement savings on this. He looked at me with something that might have been admiration if it weren't wrapped in so much fear. She's close. Really close. I needed to be gone before she got there. So you decided to take my savings and run, I said. I decided to take what we both stole and use it to. It's not what we stole, Danny. I said it quietly. The way you say a thing that needs to be heard precisely as spoken. It's what Meg saved. Dollar by dollar. For 16 years. Before she ever met me. Before she ever met you. Before any of this. 16 years of a woman deciding every single month that the future mattered more than the present. You picked the wrong account. Danny had no answer for that. None of us did. The wind came through again, carrying pine and cold, and for a moment the only sound was the leaves and the traffic on Franklin Avenue and the distant mechanical hum of a town that was continuing its Tuesday, entirely unaware of what was happening on this particular sidewalk. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw 2 Bend Police Department cruisers pulling into the credit union parking lot, unhurried. Certain. The particular pace of officers who had been called rather than dispatched to an emergency. I looked at Danny. He looked at the cruisers. And I watched him calculate. Exit routes, angles, odds, timing. The same speed and precision I had watched him calculate 100 situations over 7 years. He ran every option. I could see him running them. The way you can see a computer processing if you know what to look for. The micro movements of the eyes. The slight shift in breathing. He was measuring the distance to the nearest cross street. Evaluating whether the officers had made visual contact. Assessing the probability of a successful departure against the consequences of an unsuccessful one. Then his shoulders dropped. A quarter inch. Barely visible. The smallest possible physical expression of a man who has run out of calculations that produce a favorable outcome. There's a third account, he said. Quickly, quietly, just for me. Not Costa Rica. Domestic. Gloria Reeves's private research. Everything she's built against. Both of us. All of it sourced through one account. I was going to use the wire to access it. to get it before she filed. He held my eyes. It's not too late. You could still. Danny, Tom, if Reeves files, it's both of us. You understand that. Everything. Sam Okafor. The fabricated evidence. All of it. You could. Stop, I said. He stopped. The officers were crossing the parking lot. Two of them. One young, one older. The older one had the unhurried walk of a man who had done this enough times that urgency had been replaced by procedure. Danny Kerr was detained at 2:23 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in October outside Summit Credit Union on Franklin Avenue in Bend, Oregon. Criminal impersonation. Attempted wire fraud. He did not resist. He did not run. He walked toward the officers with the resigned, almost dignified composure of a man who had been running for 4 years and had finally, completely, run out of directions. As they walked him past me, he turned his head. Reeves is close, Tom, he said quietly. 45 days, maybe less. I watched them put him in the cruiser. I watched the cruiser pull out of the parking lot and turn right onto Franklin. I watched until it was gone. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that subscribe button. 97% of people listening right now haven't done it yet. But it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you. Genuinely. Huck, when I got home, was extremely pleased to see me in the uncomplicated way that only dogs and very young children are pleased to see people, without condition, without history, without any of the weight that comes from knowing someone fully. I sat on the kitchen floor with him for a while. His chin on my knee. His tail, doing its slow, reliable thing. Then I got up, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and started seeing the architecture. There is a moment in every con, every single one, without exception. A moment where the architecture is visible. Not to the mark, never to the mark, but to the person who built it. There is always a point where you can see the whole structure at once. Every load-bearing wall, every false door, every carefully placed detail that makes the artificial look inevitable. You see it the way an architect sees a blueprint, not as a finished thing but as a series of decisions, each one depending on the one before it, each one carrying weight that would redistribute catastrophically if removed. I had built enough structures to know what that moment felt like. I was having it now. Sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday night in Bend, Oregon, with cold coffee and a border collie asleep on my feet, and my wife in the next room, doing the specific silence of a woman who is waiting. Not the impatient kind. The other kind. The silence of a person who has already waited 2 years and has decided that a few more hours will not break what hasn't broken yet. The jazz was off. I want you to notice that. In 4 years of living in this house, Meg had never once let the house go silent. Jazz in the kitchen. Jazz in the living room. Jazz in rooms that didn't need jazz. The music was as constant as the walls, as fundamental to the structure of our home as the foundation it sat on. And tonight, it was off. The speakers were dark. The house was quiet in a way it had never been quiet, and the quiet said more than any conversation we hadn't had yet. I could see the whole architecture. My architecture. Not Danny's. Mine. 4 years of decisions laid out in sequence. The roastery. Bend. The deliberate, careful, almost surgical construction of ordinariness. Every choice I had made since Seattle arranged like load-bearing walls in a structure designed to look like a life but functioning primarily as a hiding place. And at the center of all of it, the wall I had never examined. The one I had built everything else around without ever looking at directly. The one that carried more weight than any other single element in the structure. Sam Okafor, 25 years old, 12 months in federal prison, 3 months in immigration limbo, a family in Lagos that went 6 months without income, a brother who dropped out of school, a sister who deferred her dream by a year, a mother who managed, whatever that meant, whatever suffering that small word contained, because of me, not because of Danny, because of me. Danny had panicked. Panic is a thing that happens to a person. It is not a decision. It is a weather event. What I did was not panic. What I did was take Danny's panic and aim it. With precision, with professionalism, with 7 years of training in exactly how to build a case that could not be dismantled, I aimed it at a 25-year-old kid from Lagos who was sending money home to his family, and I did not miss. I sat with that. The coffee cooled. Huck snored. The ceiling fan turned with the slow, reliable indifference of a machine that does not care about the moral reckonings happening beneath it. Then I picked up my phone. His number was still in my contacts. I had never deleted it. And sitting at that kitchen table, I examined for the first time why I had never deleted it. Not guilt, exactly. Or not only guilt, something else. Something that felt like the awareness, buried deep enough to be deniable but never quite deep enough to be gone, that this phone call was always going to have to happen. That the number was there because some part of me had always known that the architecture I'd built in Bend was temporary. That you cannot build a permanent structure on a foundation you refuse to look at. That eventually, on some Tuesday or some Wednesday or some unremarkable afternoon, I was going to have to pick up this phone and call this number and say my name to a man who had every reason in the world to hang up. It rang 5 times. Each ring lasted approximately 3 seconds, which I know because I counted them. And counting was the only thing keeping my hands still. Hello. A voice I recognized and didn't recognize simultaneously. Older. Deeper. Careful in a way that the 25-year-old version had not been careful. This voice had learned things about the world that the younger voice had still believed were exceptions rather than rules. This voice had been trained by 12 months in a federal facility and 3 months of not knowing if he would be allowed to stay in the country he had chosen as home, and 6 months of knowing his family was struggling and being unable to do anything about it from inside a cell. This voice had been shaped by loss in ways I could hear but not fully measure. And underneath all of that training, all of that earned wariness, there was something else. Something that had survived. A steadiness. A groundedness. The vocal equivalent of a man who has been knocked down repeatedly and has decided, with a quiet ferocity that does not announce itself, that he is going to keep standing up. "Sam," I said. "This is Tom Beckett." The silence that followed was the loudest silence I have ever personally produced. And I have produced some significant silences in my life, professionally and otherwise. This one was larger than all of them. It filled the kitchen. It filled the house. It made the absence of Meg's jazz feel like a whisper by comparison. It lasted long enough that I checked the screen to confirm the call was still connected. It was. Sam Okafor was on the other end of this phone call, in Columbus, Ohio, standing or sitting or lying down in whatever room he was in, and he was deciding whether to stay. Then he spoke. And his voice, when it came, was stripped of everything except the raw material underneath. No performance, no protection, just the unvarnished question of a man who had learned to be very careful about why people called him. "Why are you calling me?" "Because things are happening that involve you whether you want them to or not," I said. "And you deserve to know about them before they arrive at your door." I paused. "I'll understand if you hang up. But I'm asking you not to." There is a particular kind of silence that only exists between two people who share a history neither of them chose. Sam Okafor held that silence for 11 seconds. I counted, not because I wanted to, but because counting is what I do when I have no idea what happens next. 11 seconds. Long enough to pour a cup of coffee. Long enough to hang up and never look back. Long enough for a man to decide whether the voice on the other end of the line deserves anything at all. He did not hang up. "Talk," he said. One word. No inflection, no warmth, no hostility. Just a door held open exactly wide enough for one sentence to pass through. And I understood that if my first sentence was wrong, that door would close permanently. I had rehearsed this moment. Not recently, not consciously, but in the back of my skull, in that place where guilt stores its rough drafts. I had imagined eloquence. I had imagined a speech that would contextualize and explain, and somehow make the arithmetic of what I did come out to something other than what it was. None of that came out. 5 years ago, I fabricated evidence that sent you to prison for a crime you did not commit. I did it to protect myself and a partner named Danny Kerr. There is no justification. I am calling because the same man tried to commit fraud today using my identity, and the investigation that follows will likely uncover what we did to you. You deserve to hear it from me before you hear it from a federal agent. 47 words. I know because I counted those too. Sam breathed. Not a sigh, not a gasp. A breath. The kind you take when you are recalibrating the weight of something you have been carrying for 5 years and someone has just told you the exact number of pounds. You are the one who made the files, he said. It was not a question. The timestamps. The withdrawal patterns that matched my remittances to Lagos. My mother thought I had become a thief. She did not say it, but I heard it in the pauses between her sentences for 14 months. My brother left school. My sister deferred her nursing program. I sat in a cell in SeaTac and tried to understand how numbers I had never touched had my fingerprints on them. I did not speak. There are moments when silence is not avoidance. It is the only honest response available. I have a daughter now, Sam said. Ada. She is 14 months old. Her middle name is Ruth. I do not know why I am telling you this. Ruth. My grandmother's name. The woman whose porch gave me the scar on my left wrist. The scar Danny Kerr had replicated 3 hours ago on his own wrist to impersonate me at a bank in Bend, Oregon. I felt something move behind my ribs that I do not have a clinical word for. Not guilt. Guilt is familiar. This was something adjacent to it. Something with sharper geometry. I know why you are telling me, I said. Because names carry weight. And you want me to feel the weight of hers. Sam paused. 4 seconds. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just wanted to say her name out loud to the man who almost made sure she would never exist. You understand that. If the deportation had gone through, if Garcia had not filed that procedural challenge, I would be in Lagos right now. No degree recognition. No IT certification. No Columbus. No Ada. The arithmetic again. Every equation I had built 5 years ago had a variable I never calculated. A 14-month-old girl in Columbus, Ohio, with her father's quiet precision and a middle name she would not understand for years. What do you want from me? Sam asked. Nothing. I owe you a confession. I owe you the truth before the system delivers its version. And I want you to know that when the investigation reaches you, and it will, you will be contacted as a victim, not a suspect. I will make sure of that. I am going to file a full statement. Everything. The fabrication, the timestamps, Danny's role, my role, the money, all of it. That will cost you. Good. He said it without venom. He said it the way a structural engineer says load-bearing. A fact. A measurement of consequence that has nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with physics. We talked for another 9 minutes. He told me about his work repairing point-of-sale systems across Franklin County. He told me Ada had started pulling herself up on furniture and that she preferred his left shoulder. He told me his mother had visited last spring and held Ada for 3 hours without putting her down, and that he had not seen his mother smile like that since before the arrest. He did not forgive me. He did not say he hated me. He existed in a space between those two positions that I recognized because I had built it. When we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at Huck. Huck stared back with the profound indifference of a 12-year-old border collie who has never fabricated evidence or framed an immigrant or called a stranger to confess. I envied him. The house was still quiet. Meg's Jazz had not returned. Her car was in the driveway, which meant she was somewhere in this house, processing in the way photographers process. turning everything into composition and light and shadow. I did not go find her. Some silences need their full duration. At 7:43 that evening, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered, because I was done not answering things. "Mr. Beckett," a woman's voice said. Calm. Measured. The vocal equivalent of a filed document. "My name is Gloria Reeves. I believe we have quite a lot to discuss." Gloria Reeves had the kind of voice that made you sit up straighter without understanding why. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just precisely calibrated. The way a surveyor's level is calibrated. Every word landed exactly where she intended it to land, and none of them wasted a single syllable on warmth. "I have been investigating you for 23 months, Mr. Beckett," she said. "You, Daniel Kerr, and the matter of Sam Okafor. I am a retired fraud investigator, 31 years with Pacific Northwest Mutual. I retired 2 years ago, and I have spent every month since then on your file. 23 months. I let that number settle, while I was learning the difference between a medium and a dark roast, while I was marrying Meg, while I was walking Huck along the Deschutes River Trail and convincing myself that geography was the same thing as change. A 60-year-old woman in a home office somewhere had been reconstructing every digital footprint I thought I had erased. "How did you find Sam?" I asked. "Sam found me. Or rather, I found Sam, and Sam chose to cooperate. 14 months ago, he became a secondary account holder on a research fund I established. Not for payment, for access. He provided testimony, documentation of his arrest, details of the fabricated evidence. He wanted the record corrected. He was not interested in revenge. He was interested in accuracy. Accuracy. Sam's word. The same precision I had heard on the phone 30 minutes ago. The man I had framed had spent 5 years not seeking vengeance, but seeking the correct version of events. I was not sure whether that made me feel better or worse. Both, probably. The arithmetic of guilt does not simplify. "I know about the Costa Rica account," Gloria continued. "I know about the $275,000. I know Danny Kerr attempted to wire that amount today from Summit Credit Union using your identity. I know he was arrested at approximately 2:23 this afternoon, and I know you called Sam Okafor at approximately 6:15 this evening and confessed." She knew the timeline better than I did. She had been watching the entire architecture from above while I had been standing inside it, bumping into walls. "What I do not yet have," she said, "is your formal statement. I have Danny's patterns. I have Sam's testimony. I have financial records. What I need is your voice. On the record, Mr. Beckett. Your version. Because without it, the case against Kerr is strong, but the case for Sam's full exoneration is incomplete. The fabricated evidence needs to be attributed by you, in your words. I already told Sam I would file a full statement. I know. He called me 4 minutes after you hung up. 4 minutes. Sam had held my confession for 4 minutes before delivering it to the woman who had spent 2 years building the architecture of accountability around me. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because the precision was beautiful in a way that only someone who has built fraudulent systems can appreciate. The honest version of what I used to do. "I need to ask you something," I said. "How much of my life in Bend was real?" Gloria paused. 3 seconds. The first pause she had taken. "That is not my area of expertise, Mr. Beckett. I investigate fraud, not marriages. But I will tell you this. I have reviewed Meg Beckett's communications with Daniel Kerr over the past 22 months. She did not know about the Costa Rica account. She did not know about the wire transfer plan. She knew Kerr had information about your past, and she chose to listen. Whether that constitutes betrayal or curiosity is a question for your kitchen table, not my case file. My kitchen table." I looked down at it. Oak. Meg had found it at an estate sale in Redmond, sanded it herself, sealed it with tung oil over 3 weekends. I had watched her work and thought, this is what permanence looks like. Now I was sitting at it alone, having a phone conversation with a retired investigator who had spent longer studying my crimes than I had spent committing them. "I will come to Bend," Gloria said. "Thursday. I will need 4 to 6 hours of your time. I will bring documentation that requires your review and signature. I will also bring a preliminary draft of the case, referral to the United States Attorney's Office. You should have legal counsel present, though I suspect you will not." "I will not. I suspected as much. People who are ready to confess rarely bring lawyers. They bring coffee." It was the closest thing to humor she had offered, and I recognized it the way you recognize a single warm brick in a cold wall. "Thursday," I said. "What time?" 9. I am not a late starter. Neither am I. I know. You open the roastery at 6:15 every morning. You grind the Guatemalan blend first, because it requires the longest bloom time. You walk Huck at 6:45, north on Galveston, left on Drake, loop back on Franklin. You have not deviated from this route in 3 years and 8 months. She had been watching me the way I used to watch targets. The recognition was not comfortable. It was exact. "Thursday at 9, I said. "I will make coffee. Make it strong, Mr. Beckett. We have quite a lot of paper to get through." She hung up. No goodbye. No pleasantries. Just the clean severance of a completed transmission. I set the phone on the oak table and listened to the house. Huck's breathing from his bed near the radiator. The refrigerator's hum. The October wind pressing against the kitchen window. And somewhere down the hallway, the sound of a door opening. Not the front door. The darkroom door. Meg's footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, wearing the same olive-green sweater from this morning, her hair pulled back, her face carrying the specific exhaustion of someone who has spent 3 hours developing negatives in her mind. She looked at me. I looked at her. Huck shifted in his sleep. "Who was that?" she asked. "Gloria Reeves." Meg's hand found the doorframe. "Not for balance. For measurement. The way you touch a wall to confirm it is still solid." "She is coming Thursday," I said. Meg crossed the kitchen in 4 steps, pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down. The oak table between us. The same table she had sanded and sealed. The same table where we had eaten 900 dinners and never once discussed the real architecture of our life together. "Then we have 2 days," she said. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." I looked at her across that table and understood that this was either the last conversation of our marriage or the first honest one. Both options terrified me equally. I opened my mouth, and for the second time today, I started talking. I told her everything, not the edited version. Not the version I had rehearsed in the shower over 4 years of marriage, the one where context softened the edges and motivation provided a frame. I told her the version that had no frame, the raw file. Danny Kerr at Ashford and Crane, the elevator trick, the posture shift, the southern accent that appeared and disappeared like weather. The $275,000 we siphoned from a fraudulent doctor's insurance network in Bellevue. Howard Marsh's audit. The 12 hours between panic and decision. Sam Okafor's name on a fabricated spreadsheet. The timestamps I built to match his remittances to Lagos. The Wednesday arrest. The 12-month sentence. The brother who dropped out of school. The sister who deferred nursing. The mother who heard theft in the pauses of her own son's phone calls from a federal detention facility. I told her about the parking garage in Seattle, Danny leaning against a concrete pillar, telling me you cannot just walk away from what you are. I told her about Bend, the roastery, the deliberate construction of a life designed to look like change. I told her that I had checked on Sam Okafor every 6 months for 5 years, not out of kindness, but because guilt has a maintenance schedule, and I had followed it the way I followed every other routine. I told her about the phone call with Sam 3 hours ago. 47 words of confession. Ada. Ruth. A 14-month-old girl in Columbus whose middle name carried the weight of my grandmother's porch and a scar I got at age 7, and a man who replicated that scar today on his own wrist to steal her savings. It took 41 minutes. I know because the kitchen clock is analog, and I watched the minute hand move from the 8 to the 1. Meg did not interrupt. Not once. She sat with both hands flat on the oak table, the table she had sanded over 3 weekends in Redmond, and she listened the way she approaches a photograph. Frame first. Then, exposure. Then the details that only emerge in the developing. When I finished, the kitchen was the quietest room I had ever occupied. Huck had stopped snoring. The refrigerator had cycled off. Even the October wind had found somewhere else to be. Meg looked at her hands on the table. Then at me. "The man at the bar," she said. "The bourbon. 3 weeks after you moved to Bend. Danny sent him. Or Danny was him. I do not have confirmation. But the probability is high. So our entire origin story is a fabrication. The introduction was manufactured. What followed was not. I cannot speak for Danny's intentions, but I can speak for mine. I did not know. You were part of a design. Not until today." Meg processed this. Her eyes moved the way they move when she is evaluating a composition, scanning for the line that holds everything together, or reveals that nothing does. "You checked on Sam every 6 months," she said, "but you never contacted him. Never tried to fix it, because fixing it required confessing, and confessing required losing this." I gestured at the kitchen, the oak table, the coffee mugs on the drying rack, the window where Huck watched squirrels in the morning, the hallway that led to the dark room she had built with her own hands, the 4 years of Tuesday morning routines and Saturday farmers markets and Sunday drives along the Cascade Lakes Highway. All of it. Everything I had arranged to look like a life worth protecting. You chose comfort over a man's exoneration. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. Meg Beckett is not a woman who raises her voice. She modulates. She adjusts the aperture. She lets more light in or less, depending on what the image requires. "I knew about Danny," she said. "Not the wire transfer. Not the Costa Rica account." Gloria confirmed that tonight, and I believe her because her voice is not a voice that accommodates lies. "But I knew Danny had information about your past. He approached me at a photography exhibit 22 months ago. Downtown Portland. He said he had worked with you in Seattle, and that there were things I should know. I listened because I had always felt something sealed behind your eyes, Tom. Something filed away in a cabinet I did not have the key to. 22 months. She had known for 22 months that the man she married was hiding something structural. She had chosen to investigate quietly. The way she did everything. Through observation and patience and the slow accumulation of evidence. She had been developing me in her darkroom the way she developed negatives, waiting for the image to clarify. "I should have asked you directly," she said. "That is my failure. I treated you like a subject instead of a husband. I gave you nothing to work with. You asked the only source available. Danny Kerr is not a source. Danny Kerr is a performance. I did not understand that until today." She looked at the table again, ran one finger along a grain line she had sanded smooth 2 years ago. I watched her touch it, and realized I was watching a woman decide whether the foundation she had built was still sound, or whether the weight of what I had just placed on it was more than the wood could hold. "I am not leaving," she said. 3 words. No drama, no tears. No conditions attached to the front of the sentence, or qualifications trailing behind it. Just a structural assessment delivered with the same precision Gloria Reeves had used on the phone. "The wall is cracked, but it is still standing. I need you to understand why," she continued. "Not because I forgive you. I do not know if I forgive you. Forgiveness is not something I can evaluate in 41 minutes. I am staying because you told Sam the truth. You called a man you destroyed and you gave him 47 words that cost you everything. That is not the behavior of a man who has finished lying. That is the behavior of a man who has started telling the truth. And I want to see what that man looks like. I have never met him before. My throat closed. Not dramatically. Not the way throats close in movies, where the music swells and someone looks out a rain-streaked window. It closed the way a valve closes when the pressure exceeds what the system was designed to handle. Quietly. Mechanically. Without anyone watching. Thursday, I said. Gloria comes at 9. I know. I will be here. You do not have to be. I know that too. She stood. Pushed the chair back under the table with both hands, aligning it the way she aligned everything, with intention. She walked to the counter, filled the kettle, placed it on the stove. Chamomile. She always made chamomile when the day had used up all the coffee it deserved. Tom, she said, her back to me. The table held. I looked down at the oak surface. The grain lines. The tung oil seal. The ghost ring from a coffee mug I had set down 4 hours ago when my phone rang and a bank teller named Wesley told me there were 2 of me standing in his bank. The table held. Huck sighed in his sleep, shifted one paw, and settled again. The kettle began to hiss, and somewhere in Columbus, Ohio, a 14-month-old girl named Ada Ruth Okafor was sleeping on her father's left shoulder, carrying a name she would not understand for years, connected to a porch in a town she would never visit, given by a man who had survived the worst thing another man had ever done to him, and chosen to name his daughter after Grace instead of grief. Wednesday passed. The way days pass when you are waiting for something you cannot prepare for. I opened the roastery at 6:15, ground the Guatemalan blend first, walked Huck at 6:45, north on Galveston, left on Drake, loop back on Franklin. The route Gloria Reeves knew by heart. She had watched me walk it the way I used to watch marks settle into patterns before I exploited them. The symmetry was not lost on me. Meg canceled 2 portrait sessions and spent the morning in her dark room. I could hear the faint click of the enlarger timer through the wall, the sound of someone creating order out of chemical chaos. We did not discuss Tuesday. We did not discuss Thursday. We existed in the Wednesday silence between confession and consequence. At 4:17, my phone buzzed. Sam Okafor. I want you to see her, he said. No greeting. See who? I sat on the back step of the roastery. Huck was sleeping in a patch of October sun near the storage shed. Sam, I do not think that is appropriate. I did not ask what you think is appropriate. I asked if you want to see her. One is a policy. The other is the truth. Send me a photograph, I said. 11 seconds of silence. The same 11 seconds from our first call. Then, a notification. Ada Ruth Okafor was sitting on a kitchen floor in Columbus, Ohio. 14 months old. She had Sam's forehead, wide and serious, and eyes looking directly into the camera with an expression I can only describe as unimpressed. Yellow onesie with a cartoon giraffe. One hand gripping the leg of a wooden chair, the other reaching for something outside the frame, something beyond the edges of the image. Behind her, taped to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like Ohio, was a handprint in blue paint. Below it, in Sam's handwriting, Ada Ruth, 13 months. The kitchen was small and clean. Laminate countertops, not granite. Mismatched cabinet handles, 2 brushed nickel and 1 brass, the kind of detail that tells you a man has been assembling a home from what is available rather than what is ideal. This is what almost did not exist. This kitchen, this yellow onesie, this hand reaching beyond the frame. If the deportation had processed, if Garcia had not filed the procedural challenge, no Columbus, no E-certification, no ADA. I had built the spreadsheet that almost erased this. Matched timestamps to remittance patterns. Delivered them to Howard Marsh in a manila folder. Walked out of the building and eaten dinner. And somewhere in the math of that evening, this child had become a variable I never calculated. Her middle name, I said. Ruth. I told you. Why Ruth? Sam's voice shifted. Not softer. Deeper. The register you use when explaining something that matters more than anything else you have ever said. When I was in SeaTac, month 4, a woman wrote to me, a church volunteer. She ran a letter-writing program for inmates with no family contact in the United States. Ruth Abernathy, 73 years old. She wrote every Tuesday for 8 months. She told me about her garden, her dead husband Clarence, her border collie who had died the previous spring. She told me the word Ruth means compassion, and that compassion is not a feeling, but a practice, something you do with your hands, even when your heart has not caught up yet. Tuesday, a border collie, a woman named Ruth. The coincidences stacked in a way that made this story feel less like chance and more like something I did not have the vocabulary for. Not fate, but something adjacent, something with geometry. She died 6 months before Ada was born, Sam continued. Pancreatic cancer. The prison chaplain forwarded her last letter. She wrote it 11 days before she died. It said, "Dear Sam, I am running out of Tuesdays, but you are not. Please use yours well." I closed my eyes. Huck shifted in the sun. A car passed on Galveston Avenue. The world continued its ordinary business, while I held a phone containing a photograph of a child who existed because a 73-year-old church volunteer had written letters every Tuesday to a man I had framed. "I named her Ada because it means noble," Sam said. "And Ruth because someone showed me what that word looks like when it has hands." I did not speak. There are moments when language is insufficient. Not because the words do not exist, but because the distance between what happened and what words can carry is too wide to bridge with grammar. "Thank you for sending the photograph," I said. "You needed to see what you almost took. And what survived." Sam hung up. No goodbye. The same clean severance Gloria had used. I was beginning to understand that the people affected by my decisions communicated in a language stripped of pleasantry. No padding, just the load-bearing words. I saved the photograph and set it as my phone background, which is either the healthiest or most self-destructive thing I have ever done. The answer depends on which version of me you ask. Thursday morning. 6:12. 3 minutes before my alarm. I was already awake. Meg was already awake. Huck was the only one in the house, with the moral clarity to sleep through the night. I envied him for the second time this week. I made coffee. Strong. Gloria had requested strong, and I had a feeling that disappointing Gloria Reeves in any capacity, including caffeine, would be inadvisable. At 8:57, a silver Honda Accord pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out. Shorter than her voice suggested, maybe 5'4", silver hair cut close, reading glasses on a chain. She carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had survived more depositions than most attorneys. She walked to the front door the way she spoke. No wasted steps. I opened the door before she knocked. She looked at me, then at the coffee, then back at me. "Mr. Beckett," she said. "Shall we begin?" Gloria Reeves sat at the oak table like she had been sitting at oak tables her entire career, which, based on 31 years of fraud investigation, she probably had. She placed the leather briefcase on the floor, not on the table. She removed her reading glasses from the chain, put them on, and opened a manila folder. With the practiced efficiency of a woman who had opened 10,000 manila folders and never once found a surprise she was not already expecting. Meg brought a second cup of coffee without being asked. Gloria looked at her, nodded once, and returned to the folder. It was the most economical expression of gratitude I had ever witnessed. "I will walk you through the documentation," Gloria said. "Then, you will provide a formal statement. I will record it. The recording will accompany my case referral to the United States Attorney's Office in Portland. Do you understand the implications of providing a recorded statement without legal counsel present? Say it for the record. I understand that my statement can and will be used in federal proceedings. I am choosing to provide it without an attorney because an attorney's job is to protect me, and I am not interested in being protected from the consequences of what I did. Gloria looked at me over her reading glasses. It was the first time I saw something in her expression that was not purely clinical. Not warmth. Recognition. The way one professional acknowledges another's competence, even when that competence has been applied to terrible things. She spent the first 90 minutes walking me through her file, 23 months of investigation, organized chronologically, cross-referenced, and annotated in handwriting so precise it looked like a font. She had reconstructed every digital footprint I had created to frame Sam Okafor. The fabricated timestamps. The withdrawal patterns matched to his Lagos remittances. The phantom login credentials I had planted in Ashford and Crane's system. She had found all of it, disassembled it, and laid it out on paper, the way a mechanic lays out engine parts on a clean cloth. "You were good," she said, without admiration. The construction was sophisticated. Most investigators would have accepted it at face value. Howard Marsh accepted it. But there were two errors, small ones, the kind only someone with 31 years of pattern recognition would catch. What errors? The timestamps on the fabricated logins were generated in Pacific time. Sam Okafor's legitimate access records show he occasionally worked remotely from his apartment in Bellevue, which is also Pacific time. But on 3 of the fabricated dates, Sam was visiting his mother's church community in Tukwila. His phone records place him there. You matched the time zone, but not the geography. I had not known that. 5 years ago, I had built what I thought was a perfect frame, and a retired woman with reading glasses had found the seam I never knew existed. Meg sat in the living room during the documentation review. I could see her through the doorway, sitting in the armchair with Huck at her feet, not reading, not looking at her phone, just sitting, holding space for whatever was happening at the oak table without inserting herself into it. I had never loved her more clearly than in that moment. And I understood that clarity and love are not always comfortable companions. At 11:40, Gloria turned on the recorder. A small digital device, silver, placed between our coffee cups. State your full name. Thomas Allen Beckett. Mr. Beckett, in your own words, describe the events of 5 to 7 years ago involving your employment at Ashford and Crane, your associate Daniel Kerr, and the fraudulent conviction of Samuel Okafor. I spoke for 1 hour and 14 minutes. I described everything. The partnership with Danny, the elevator transformations, the Bellevue doctor, the $275,000, Howard Marsh's audit, the 12 hours of panic, the decision to build the frame, Sam's name on the spreadsheet, the Manila folder, the Wednesday arrest. I described it the way Gloria had organized her file, chronologically, without editorializing, without the parenthetical asides and dry humor. I used to keep myself at a comfortable distance from the facts, just the facts, the way they happened. The way they cost a 25-year-old man from Lagos 12 months in a federal facility and nearly cost him his right to remain in the country where his daughter would eventually be born. When I finished, Gloria pressed stop. She removed her glasses, set them on the table, and looked at me with her full, unmediated attention. The United States Attorney will review this referral within 30 to 45 days. Based on the evidence and your statement, I expect the following outcomes. Daniel Kerr will face charges of wire fraud, criminal impersonation, and conspiracy. Given his prior record and today's attempt, sentencing guidelines suggest 4 to 7 years. You will face charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and fabrication of evidence. Your cooperation, voluntary confession, and the absence of prior convictions will be significant mitigating factors. I would estimate 18 to 24 months of supervised administrative release. No prison time, but restrictions on travel, employment in financial sectors, and mandatory community service. She paused. Samuel Okafor's conviction will be formally vacated. His record will be expunged. The process typically takes 4 to 6 months. 4 to 6 months. After 5 years of carrying a federal conviction he did not earn, Sam Okafor would have his name returned to him. Not because the system caught its own error, because a retired woman spent her retirement savings investigating a case no one asked her to investigate, and a man in a coffee roastery in Bend, Oregon, finally picked up the phone. Gloria gathered her papers, returned them to the manila folder, placed the folder in the briefcase. She stood. "One more thing, Mr. Beckett." She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a small photograph, wallet-sized. She placed it on the oak table facing me. Ada Ruth Okafor. A different photograph than the one Sam had sent. This one was older, maybe month 9 or 10. Ada was being held by Sam, both of them looking at something off camera, and Sam was smiling. Not performing happiness, just smiling. The kind of smile that exists only when a man is holding his daughter and has temporarily forgotten every terrible thing that has ever happened to him. "Sam gave me this 14 months ago," Gloria said. "The day he agreed to cooperate. He said, 'This is why.' I have carried it in my briefcase since then. I think it belongs on your refrigerator now." She walked to the door, opened it herself, turned back. "You made strong coffee, Mr. Beckett. Thank you for that." She was gone. Silver Honda. Driveway. October light. I looked down at the photograph on the oak table. The same table Meg had sanded. The same table that had held a 41-minute confession and a marriage that refused to collapse. I picked it up. Meg appeared in the doorway. "Is it over?" she asked. "The beginning of over," I said. "Yes. The months that followed were not dramatic. That is the thing no one tells you about consequences. They arrive not as explosions, but as paperwork. Forms, signatures, meetings with attorneys you said you did not need but eventually accepted because the federal system does not care about your philosophical position on self-representation." Meg found a lawyer in Portland named David Chen, who spoke in complete paragraphs and never once asked me if I was sorry, which I appreciated because the question was irrelevant. I was sorry. That had been established. What mattered now was documentation. Danny Kerr's trial lasted 4 days. I did not attend. Gloria Reeves did. She called me afterward with the verdict the way she delivered everything, without preamble. 6 years. Federal facility in Sheridan. He showed no remorse, which the judge noted. 6 years. Danny would be nearly 50 when he walked out. I tried to imagine Danny at 50, and could not. Danny existed in my memory as a permanent 37, leaning against a concrete pillar in a Seattle parking garage, telling me you cannot walk away from what you are. He had been right about that. He had also been unable to follow his own advice, which is the particular tragedy of people who understand human nature brilliantly and their own not at all. My sentencing came 3 months later. 18 months supervised administrative release. No prison. Restrictions on financial sector employment, which was irrelevant because I had no intention of returning to a career built on reading other people's numbers. 200 hours of community service. A fine I could pay with the sale of the roastery equipment. Sam Okafor's conviction was formally vacated on a Wednesday in March. 6 months and 4 days after Gloria Reeves sat at my kitchen table. I know, because Sam called me. Not to celebrate, to inform. "It is done," he said. Ada and I went to the courthouse. She wore the yellow onesie, the giraffe one. She is too big for it now, but I wanted her to be wearing it when the record was corrected. I do not know why. I knew why. But some things do not need to be explained by the person who caused them. They need to be honored by silence. We sold the house in Bend in May. Meg handled the listing, the staging, the open houses. She photographed the rooms herself, and I noticed she did not photograph the kitchen. When I asked why, she said, "Some rooms are not for strangers." The oak table went with us. It was the first thing loaded onto the truck and the last thing unloaded in Ashland, Oregon. 173 miles south of Bend. A town built around a Shakespeare festival and surrounded by mountains that do not care about your past. Meg found a studio space on East Main Street for her photography. I found a small storefront on A Street where I taught computer literacy to seniors 3 mornings a week, which is what happens when a man who built fraudulent digital systems decides to use the same skills to teach a 70-year-old woman named Dolores how to video call her grandchildren in Tucson. Huck died on a Saturday in November. He was 12 years and 9 months old. He died in the kitchen of the Ashland house, on a bed Meg had made from an old quilt, with his head on my left foot. The vet said it was his heart, which had been enlarged for years, working harder than it needed to because that is what border collies do. They work harder than necessary because they do not know how to do anything at half capacity. I buried him in the backyard, under a dogwood tree that had already lost its leaves. Meg stood beside me and did not speak. There was nothing to say that the shovel was not already saying. 3 months later, on a Tuesday in February, Meg came home with a dog, a border collie, young, maybe 2 years old, black and white with one brown ear, and the specific intensity of an animal who has already decided that everything in the world requires his supervision. "Where did you find him?" I said. "Rescue in Medford. He was surrendered by a family that moved to an apartment." "What is his name?" "They called him Bandit." "I am not calling him Bandit." I looked at the dog. The dog looked at me, with the unblinking assessment of a creature who has not yet decided whether I deserve his loyalty. Fair enough. I had not yet decided whether I deserved a second border collie. The first one had witnessed the best years of my deception and the worst day of my honesty, and he had treated both with the same indifferent devotion. "Tuesday," I said. Meg looked at me. "His name is Tuesday." She understood. She did not ask why. She knew about Ruth Abernathy's letters. She knew about the phone call from Wesley that arrived on a Tuesday morning. She knew that every pivotal moment in this story had landed on the same day of the week, and that naming a dog after that day was either an act of remembrance or an act of defiance, and that perhaps there was no difference between the two. Tuesday walked into the kitchen, sniffed the oak table, circled twice, and lay down beneath it. He fit exactly in the space where Huck used to sleep, not because the space was made for him, but because border collies understand architecture instinctively. They find the load-bearing structure and they position themselves beneath it. Meg sat at the table. I sat across from her. Tuesday breathed steadily beneath us. "New dog," she said. "New dog," I said. "Sam table. Sam table." She reached across and placed her hand on mine. The oak grain under our combined weight. The February light through the kitchen window. A dog named after the day everything changed, sleeping under a table that had held a confession, a marriage, and the beginning of whatever this was now. There is a Japanese art form called kintsugi. You take a broken piece of pottery and you repair it with gold. The philosophy is not that breaking makes something less valuable. The philosophy is that the history of the object, including its damage, is part of its beauty. The cracks become the most important lines in the design. I learned this from Dolores, the 70-year-old woman I teach to video call her grandchildren on Tuesday mornings. She has a kintsugi bowl on her kitchen shelf that her late husband brought back from Okinawa in 1971. She told me, "Thomas, the bowl is not beautiful despite the cracks. It is beautiful because someone thought the cracks were worth filling with something precious." I think about that bowl when I think about this story. I am Thomas Allen Beckett. I am 43 years old. I live in Ashland, Oregon, with my wife Meg, who is a photographer, and a border collie named Tuesday, who believes the entire world requires his constant supervision, and is probably correct. I teach computer literacy to senior citizens 3 mornings a week in a storefront on A Street. I make strong coffee. I walk my dog north, then left, then loop back. Because I am a man of roots. And roots are what I have instead of certainty. 7 years ago, I was an insurance fraud investigator who became the thing he investigated. I stole $275,000 with a partner named Danny Kerr. I framed a 25-year-old man named Sam Okafor to avoid detection. Sam went to prison for 12 months. His brother dropped out of school. His sister deferred her nursing degree. His mother heard silence where her son's voice used to be. I did that. Not circumstance. Not Danny. Me. I built the spreadsheet. I matched the timestamps. I delivered the manila folder. I walked out of the building and ate dinner. 4 years ago, I moved to Bend, Oregon, and built a life designed to look like redemption without ever actually redeeming anything. I opened a coffee roastery. I married a woman I loved. I walked a dog along the same route every morning and told myself that consistency was the same thing as change. It was not. Consistency without honesty is just a more disciplined form of hiding. Then a bank teller named Wesley called me on a Tuesday and told me there were 2 of me standing in his bank. Everything that followed, the confrontation, the arrest, the confession, the calls, Gloria Reeves and her 23 months of patient architecture, Meg at the oak table, saying, "I am not leaving," Sam's voice on the phone saying, "Talk," a photograph of a 14-month-old girl in a yellow onesie, reaching for something beyond the frame. All of it happened because one ordinary person in one ordinary bank noticed that something was wrong and decided it mattered enough to make a phone call. Wesley did not save my life, but he opened the door that led to the hallway, that led to the room where my life was waiting to be saved, and I walked through it. And I kept walking. I want to tell you what I have learned, but I am suspicious of lessons. Lessons imply that suffering has a purpose, and I am not convinced it does. What I can tell you is what I have observed. I have observed that the truth does not set you free. That is a misquotation of a more complicated idea. The truth sets you loose. It unhooks you from the scaffolding you built to hold up the version of yourself that was never real, and then you fall, and then you discover what is actually underneath. Sometimes what is underneath is strong enough to stand on. Sometimes it is not. You do not get to know in advance. You just tell the truth and find out. I have observed that the people you damage do not owe you forgiveness, and that forgiveness, when it comes, looks nothing like what you expected. Sam Okafor has not forgiven me. He has done something more difficult. He has allowed me to exist in his awareness without requiring me to disappear. He sends me a photograph of Ada every 3 months. She is walking now. She has opinions about bananas. She calls the border collie in the pictures on Sam's phone dog, which is 2 more syllables than most people need, but exactly the right number for a child who is learning that the world contains more things than she initially estimated. I have observed that love is not a feeling. It is a decision made repeatedly, under imperfect conditions. Meg Beckett decided to stay at an oak table with a man who had lied to her for 4 years, and she has continued to decide to stay every morning since. Not because she forgave me, because she saw something worth watching. I am trying to be worth watching. Some days I succeed. Some days I drink coffee alone at 5 in the morning and stare at a photograph of a girl in Columbus and wonder if the gold in the cracks is real or if I am just painting over the damage and calling it art. I do not know the answer. I suspect I will not know for a long time. But I have a table, and a dog, and a wife who sees things in their proper light, and a Tuesday morning computer class where Dolores is learning to use emojis and has discovered the one that is crying and laughing at the same time and uses it in every single message, which I think is the most honest emoji ever designed, because that is what life feels like most of the time. Crying and laughing, simultaneously, without resolution. Danny Kerr is in year 2 at Sheridan. I do not write to him. I do not know if someone should. I know that the man who taught me to change my posture in an elevator and become someone else entirely is now in a room where he cannot become anyone but himself, and I do not know whether that is punishment or mercy. Probably both. The arithmetic of justice does not simplify any more than the arithmetic of guilt. Sam Okafor's record is clean. His sister finished her nursing degree. His brother returned to school. His mother visited again last spring and held Ada for 4 hours and called her Omomi, which means my child in Yoruba. And Sam told me this on the phone, and his voice did not break, but it bent, the way strong things bend, when the weight they are carrying shifts from grief to gratitude. Ruth Abernathy is buried in a cemetery in Tukwila, Washington. I have never visited. I think about visiting. I think about standing at the grave of a woman I never met who wrote letters every Tuesday to a man I framed and whose name is now carried by a child who reaches for things beyond the frame of every photograph. I think about what I would say. I think I would say thank you for not running out of Tuesdays before Sam ran out of hope. But I have not gone yet. Maybe next Tuesday. Tuesday, the dog is asleep under the oak table. His breathing is steady. His paw twitches against something in a dream, something only border collies know about, some field that needs herding, some flock that needs direction. Meg is in her studio. The February light is doing what February light does in Southern Oregon. Arriving late, leaving early, and making everything in between feel borrowed. I am sitting at the table that held, and I am telling you this story not because I deserve to tell it, but because somewhere, right now, someone is sitting at their own table, staring at their own phone, knowing there is a call they need to make, a truth they need to tell, a name they need to say out loud. Make the call. It will cost you everything you have built on silence. And what remains? The thing still standing after the scaffolding falls. That is the part worth keeping. That is the part worth filling with gold. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the calls you have not made and the truths you have not told, leave a comment. Tell me what your Tuesday is. And if you are new here, subscribe. We tell stories about the moments that break people open and the gold they find inside. I will see you next Tuesday.